The golden anniversary celebration was a grand affair. The opulent ballroom glittered with chandeliers, casting soft golden light over the room, where friends and family had gathered to honor Charles and Eleanor's 50 years of marriage. Guests toasted with champagne, their laughter blending with the soft strains of a string quartet. Eleanor, regal, in a gold-embroidered gown, stood at Charles's side as he delivered a charming speech, recounting fond memories of their life together. The room buzzed with admiration for the couple's enduring love. Then, as the applause settled, Eleanor took the microphone. Her voice was steady, her smile serene. 50 years, she began, is a long time to share a life with someone. It's a journey filled with joy, challenges, and discoveries. A murmur rippled through the crowd, but Eleanor continued, undeterred. As many of you know, Charles has always been a man of ambition and charm. These traits helped build his career and won my heart. But, she paused, locking eyes with her husband, charm can sometimes hide secrets. Charles shifted uneasily. His jovial mask faltered. Guests exchanged puzzled glances, unsure if this was part of a rehearsed joke. For years I told myself that a long marriage required compromise. Trust. Forgiveness, Eleanor said. Her tone was calm, but there was a sharp edge to her words. But what do you do when the person you trust most betrays you? Charles's face paled. Eleanor, he whispered, but she raised her hand, silencing him. 6 months ago, I found the truth, she announced. A truth that has been hidden for nearly 2 decades. She pulled out a manila envelope, which she had placed discreetly beneath the podium earlier. From it, she retrieved a stack of photographs, glossy evidence of Charles's infidelity. She held one aloft for all to see. The image showed Charles, years younger but unmistakable, locked in an embrace with a woman who was not Eleanor. Gasps erupted. This woman, Eleanor said, her voice rising, was one of many. And Charles thought I'd never know. She tossed the photo onto the table before her, where more incriminating pictures spilled out like a dam bursting. Charles stammered, but no words came. The room had gone silent, save for the occasional hushed whisper. Eleanor wasn't done. I've spent these past months preparing for this moment, she said, addressing the crowd now. I invited you all here, not to celebrate a lie, but to expose it, because I refuse to wear the mask of the dutiful wife for another day. Some guests began to edge toward the exit, unsure of how to react. Others watched in rapt disbelief. Charles's protests finally broke through. Eleanor, we can talk about this. She cut him off with a bitter laugh. Talk? Like the way you talk to her? Or to the others? Her eyes narrowed. No, Charles. There's nothing left to say. Eleanor turned to the crowd, her poise unshaken. The truth may hurt, but it also sets you free. Tonight, I reclaim my freedom. With that, she stepped down from the podium. The room erupted into chaos. Half-whispered scandals, muttered disbelief. Eleanor didn't look back as she walked out, leaving Charles standing alone, surrounded by the shards of his carefully constructed facade. By morning, the photos were all over social media. The perfect image of their golden marriage was irreparably tarnished. Eleanor, however, felt lighter than she had in decades. Charles spent the next several days in damage control mode. Friends stopped answering his calls. Colleagues sent terse emails instead of invitations, and even his children avoided his attempts to justify what had happened. He paced the living room of their now empty home, staring at the shattered remnants of the life he once controlled so meticulously. Eleanor, meanwhile, had disappeared. No one knew where she had gone, and she hadn't shared her plans with anyone, not even their children. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Eleanor had retreated to a coastal town 3 hours away. A modest inn with a view of the ocean became her sanctuary. She walked the beach at dawn, letting the waves wash over her feet, carrying away years of resentment with each pull of the tide. The innkeeper, a kind older woman named Grace, didn't pry. She offered warm tea, fresh scones, and a quiet understanding that Eleanor found comforting. Eleanor hadn't planned what would come next. For the first time in her life, she allowed herself the luxury of unknowing. The clarity she had felt during her speech that night had given way to a kind of quiet exhaustion. But with each passing day, as she watched the sun rise over the water, she began to piece together a new vision of her future. It was on one of these mornings that a knock came at her door. When she opened it, she found her youngest daughter, Lila, standing there, clutching a scarf against the cold wind. "Mom," Lila said softly, stepping into the room. "I had to see you." Eleanor closed the door behind her, her heart tightening. Lila sat on the edge of the bed, her face a mixture of concern and relief. "You've been quiet," Lila began. "Dad's been spiraling. But I wanted to know how you're doing." Eleanor smiled faintly, sitting beside her daughter. "Better than I thought I would," she admitted. "I didn't realize how heavy it was, carrying that secret for so long." Lila looked down, fiddling with the edge of her scarf. "I didn't want to say anything that night, but I knew." Eleanor turned sharply. "You knew asterisk?" Lila nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "Not everything, but I saw enough to know he wasn't faithful. I didn't know how to tell you. I thought you'd be angry." Eleanor's heart ached, not with anger, but with sadness. "Oh, Lila," she said, pulling her daughter into an embrace. "You shouldn't have carried that burden." For the first time in years, Eleanor felt truly connected to her daughter. They stayed up late into the night, talking about things they had never dared discuss before. By morning, Eleanor felt something stir within her, a new sense of purpose. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Meanwhile, Charles wasn't just spiraling, he was unraveling. The press, having caught wind of the public spectacle at the anniversary party, hounded him for details. Tabloids published salacious stories, some true, others exaggerated. His business partners began distancing themselves. Even his closest friends, men who had once shared a laugh over his escapades, now avoided his calls. In his desperation, Charles hired a private investigator to locate Eleanor. He convinced himself that if he could find her, he could fix everything. He didn't fully understand why, whether it was love, pride, or fear of losing the last semblance of his identity. But the search yielded nothing. Eleanor had covered her tracks well. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. 3 weeks after the anniversary, Charles received a letter. The handwriting was unmistakable. Eleanor's elegant script. It was brief, but it struck like a dagger. "Charles, you've spent our marriage taking what you wanted, assuming I would always be there to clean up the mess. Not anymore. I'm not coming back. By the time you read this, the papers will have been filed. It's time for both of us to move on, though I suspect that will be harder for you. Goodbye, Eleanor." For the first time in years, Charles felt truly alone. He stared at the letter, his hands trembling, as the reality of his loss sank in. Eleanor, on the other hand, felt a quiet satisfaction as she dropped the letter into the mailbox and walked away. For the first time in decades, she was stepping into a future that was entirely her own. Charles's world grew smaller with each passing week. The mansion felt cavernous and cold without Eleanor's presence. Her scent had faded from the rooms. Her laughter no longer echoed through the halls. He poured himself into his work, but even that was slipping through his fingers. Contracts were pulled, investors grew wary, and his once golden reputation lay tarnished beyond repair. But it was the silence that haunted him most. Every evening, as darkness fell, he replayed Eleanor's speech in his mind. The calm precision of her words cut deeper than any angry outburst could have. For years, he had convinced himself that his transgressions were harmless, that Eleanor's love and loyalty would shield him from the consequences. He had been wrong. Late one night, Charles found himself digging through old photo albums. There they were, smiling together on their honeymoon, holding their children for the first time, posing at galas and charity events. The life they had built seemed perfect on the surface. Yet now, he realized how much of it had been held together by Eleanor's quiet resilience. Charles's regret began to fester, but regret alone could not mend what he had broken. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Eleanor's days grew lighter, freer. She spent her mornings walking along the beach, her afternoons reading novels she had never made time for, and her evenings sketching the ocean from her balcony. Grace, the innkeeper, had become a friend, offering companionship without judgment. One afternoon, Eleanor received a package at the inn. She hesitated before opening it, recognizing the return address, the mansion. Inside, she found a bundle of letters written by Charles. They were numbered, one for each week since her departure. In the first letter, Charles begged for forgiveness. He confessed to his affairs in detail, leaving no room for excuses. In the second, he spoke of his loneliness, admitting that he hadn't realized how much he had depended on her presence. By the fifth letter, his tone shifted. He spoke of gratitude for the years they had shared, even if she never forgave him. The final letter was different. Eleanor, this will be the last time I write to you. I understand now that I can't undo what I've done. You deserve peace, and I will no longer intrude upon it. I've decided to sell the house. I thought it was a monument to our life together, but now I see it as a monument to my selfishness. I hope this allows you to move forward, as you deserve to. Always, Charles. Eleanor stared at the letters, her emotions swirling. They felt genuine, raw, and yet she felt no desire to respond. The man who had written these words was not the same man she had lived with for 50 years. He was a stranger. She carefully folded the letters and placed them in a drawer. They would remain there, unread again. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Charles sold the house, as promised. He moved into a modest apartment in the city, where he lived a quieter, humbler life. The invitations to high society events stopped coming. The women who had once been so eager for his attention disappeared. His days became a repetitive cycle of work, reflection, and solitude. In the rare moments when he crossed paths with his children, they were polite but distant. They had always been closer to Eleanor, and now they followed her lead. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. 1 year after the anniversary debacle, Eleanor hosted a small gallery exhibition in the coastal town. Her sketches of the ocean, simple yet evocative, had drawn the attention of local art lovers. The opening night was intimate, attended by new friends she had made during her time there. As Eleanor moved through the gallery, she felt a sense of fulfillment she hadn't known in years. The whispers of admiration for her art, the genuine warmth of the attendees. It was a new chapter, one she had written for herself. That night, Eleanor stood on the balcony of her cottage, gazing out at the sea. She thought of Charles briefly, wondering if he had truly changed. But the thought passed like a wave receding from the shore. Her life was her own now, and she intended to live it fully. The years ahead stretched before her, not as a continuation of what had been, but as a blank canvas waiting for her to create something entirely new. 2 years passed, and life for Eleanor had taken on a quiet, satisfying rhythm. She had purchased a small cottage near the beach and turned one room into a studio where she painted and sketched. Her gallery exhibition had led to a modest but steady demand for her art, and she found joy in the creative process. She had rebuilt her life from the ground up, leaving the shadows of her past firmly behind her. One crisp autumn morning, Eleanor was walking through the town square when she noticed a familiar figure sitting on a bench near the fountain. Charles. He looked different, smaller somehow. His once imposing presence was diminished, his tailored suits replaced by a simple sweater and slacks. His hair had gone completely gray, and his face bore lines that hadn't been there the last time she had seen him. Yet, there was something in his posture, a quietness, a humility, that gave her pause. For a moment, Eleanor considered walking away, but something made her stop. She approached him slowly, her heels clicking softly on the cobblestones. Charles looked up, startled at first, but then his expression softened into something she couldn't quite read. "Eleanor," he said, his voice a mixture of surprise and gratitude. "I didn't expect to see you here." She studied him for a moment, then sat down on the bench, leaving a polite distance between them. "I live here now," she said simply. "I heard about your gallery," he said, nodding. "Your work is beautiful, just like you." Eleanor raised an eyebrow, but there was no charm or manipulation in his tone, just sincerity. "Thank you." Silence settled between them, comfortable, but charged. Charles finally broke it. "I wanted to tell you." He hesitated, searching for the right words. "I wanted to say that I'm sorry. For everything. Not just for what I did, but for who I was. I thought about writing again, but I didn't want to intrude." Eleanor nodded, her expression calm, but unreadable. "I received your letters." He looked down at his hands, a flicker of vulnerability crossing his face. "I didn't expect you to respond. I just needed to say it." For a moment, Eleanor felt the weight of their shared history pressing down on her. She had spent years trying to make sense of the man beside her, to reconcile the love they had once shared with the pain he had caused. Now, looking at him, she realized she no longer needed to. "Charles," she said gently, "I've forgiven you. Not for your sake, but for mine. I needed to let go of the anger to move forward, and I have." He met her gaze, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I'm glad," he whispered. They sat together for a while, watching the people in the square go about their lives. There was no need for more words. Whatever closure they needed had finally arrived, quiet and unspoken. When Eleanor rose to leave, Charles didn't try to stop her. He simply watched as she walked away, her head held high, her steps confident. Eleanor didn't look back. She had made peace with her past, and the future was hers to embrace. As she walked home, the sea breeze on her face, she felt a deep sense of gratitude for her strength, for her freedom, and for the second life she had carved out of the wreckage of the first. Charles stayed on the bench long after she was gone, lost in thought. For the first time in years, he felt something resembling peace. He knew he would never regain what he had lost, but perhaps that was enough. Eleanor's path and his had finally diverged for good, and though their shared history would always remain, they both understood that their stories had taken them in different directions. And so, as the afternoon sun dipped low over the town, Eleanor returned to her cottage by the sea, where her paints and brushes waited. The next chapter of her life was still unwritten, but she was ready to face it, one vibrant stroke at a time. Months passed, and Eleanor's life continued to blossom. Her artwork gained more recognition, and she began teaching small classes at the local community center, sharing her techniques with eager students. Her name was becoming well known in the art world, at least within her cozy coastal town. Yet, for Eleanor, the greatest joy came not from the accolades, but from the quiet satisfaction of building something entirely her own. One crisp spring morning, Eleanor received an invitation in the mail. It was from her eldest daughter, Meredith, inviting her to a family gathering, a long-overdue reunion of sorts. Eleanor hesitated at first. Her relationship with her children had improved since her separation from Charles, but there were still moments of awkwardness, unspoken questions lingering beneath their conversations. Eventually, Eleanor decided to attend. It was time to fully re-enter the family dynamic, to face whatever remnants of the past might still linger. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The gathering was held at Meredith's sprawling home, nestled on the outskirts of the city. When Eleanor arrived, she was greeted warmly by her grandchildren, their laughter filling the air like music. She felt a pang of pride watching them. They were growing up so quickly, yet she had never felt closer to them. As the day unfolded, Eleanor noticed whispers among the adults. Meredith and Lila exchanged meaningful glances, while their brother David seemed unusually quiet. After dinner, the siblings approached Eleanor as she sipped her tea on the back patio. Meredith spoke first, her tone cautious. "Mom, we wanted to tell you something," she began. "About Dad." Eleanor's expression didn't change, but she felt her chest tighten slightly. "Go on." Lila took a deep breath. "He's not well. He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer a few months ago." The words hit Eleanor harder than she had anticipated. For all the hurt and betrayal, she had never wished ill upon Charles. A mixture of emotions washed over her: grief, confusion, and even a flicker of guilt. "I didn't know," she said quietly. "Why didn't anyone tell me sooner?" David shifted uncomfortably. "He didn't want us to. He didn't want you to feel obligated." Eleanor stared at the garden beyond the patio, the soft glow of lanterns illuminating the flowers. For years, she had built a life free of him, and yet the weight of their shared history tugged at her now. "Does he need anything?" she asked finally. Meredith hesitated, then said, "He's in hospice care now. He has a nurse, but he's asked to see you." Eleanor looked at her children, searching their faces for answers. They didn't push her. They simply waited, giving her space to decide. "I'll think about it," she said softly. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. Memories of Charles flooded her mind, the good, the bad, and the moments in between. She thought about the man he had been, the man he had become, and the quiet regret she had seen in his eyes the last time they met. By morning, she had made her decision. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. When Eleanor arrived at the hospice facility, she was greeted by a nurse who led her to Charles's room. The space was modest, a stark contrast to the luxury he had once surrounded himself with. He lay in the bed, thinner than she had ever seen him, his skin pale and his eyes sunken. "Eleanor," he said weakly, his voice a rasp. She pulled a chair to his bedside, sitting down with a calm expression. "Charles." For a moment, they simply looked at each other. The weight of 5 decades hung between them, but the anger and resentment had long since dissipated. "I didn't think you'd come," he admitted. "I wasn't sure I would," she replied honestly, "but the children thought I should." He chuckled faintly, though it turned into a cough. "They've always been wiser than me." Silence settled over them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Charles reached for her hand, his touch frail and tentative. "I'm sorry, Eleanor," he said, his voice trembling. "Not just for the affairs, but for everything. For not being the husband you deserved. For taking you for granted." Eleanor's eyes softened. "I forgave you a long time ago, Charles. I hope you've forgiven yourself." Tears welled in his eyes. "I'm trying." They sat together for hours, talking about their children, their grandchildren, and even the happy memories they had shared. For the first time in years, they connected not as husband and wife, but as two people who had once loved deeply, despite everything. When Eleanor left, she didn't feel sadness or regret. Instead, she felt a sense of closure, a peaceful finality. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Charles passed away a week later. Eleanor attended the small funeral, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She didn't speak during the service, but her presence was enough. As she returned to her cottage that evening, she sat by the window, watching the waves crash against the shore. Life moved forward, as it always did. And though her story with Charles had come to an end, Eleanor's own story continued, vibrant and full of possibility. Months after Charles's funeral, Eleanor found herself reflecting on the strange completeness she now felt. She had not only survived the heartbreak, the betrayal, and the years of neglect, but had emerged stronger, creating a life of her own design. Yet, life had a way of presenting unexpected chapters, even when one thought the story was nearly complete. One brisk autumn evening, Eleanor received a call from an unfamiliar number. She hesitated, her first instinct to ignore it, but something compelled her to answer. "Hello?" she said, her voice steady. "Mrs. Davenport?" The voice on the other end was soft but unfamiliar. "Yes, this is she. This is Cynthia Reed. I don't know how to say this, but I think you knew my mother, Helen Reed." Eleanor froze. The name struck her like a distant echo, a shadow from the past. Helen Reed. She hadn't heard that name in years. Helen had been one of Charles's mistresses, one of the first Eleanor had discovered all those years ago. A woman Eleanor had quietly confronted, but chose to walk away from, realizing her anger was better directed at Charles than at the woman who, she later learned, had also been deceived. "I remember her," Eleanor said cautiously. "Why are you calling me?" Cynthia hesitated before speaking again. "My mother passed away recently. While going through her things, I found letters she'd written to my father. Except, my father isn't the man I thought he was. It's Charles." Eleanor felt her breath catch, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I see. I'm not calling to disrupt your life or cause pain," Cynthia added quickly. "But I needed to know if it's true. Is Charles Davenport my father?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unavoidable. Eleanor closed her eyes, her mind racing through the implications. "It's possible," Eleanor said carefully. "I can't confirm it. But Charles never denied his relationship with your mother." There was a long pause on the line. When Cynthia finally spoke, her voice was filled with a mixture of sorrow and determination. "I didn't know him. I don't want anything from you or his estate. I just wanted to understand where I come from." Eleanor's heart softened. She understood the young woman's need for answers, her search for identity amidst the wreckage of secrets. "Cynthia," Eleanor said gently, "I don't have all the answers you're looking for, but I'm willing to meet with you. Perhaps we can piece together some of the truth together." Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The meeting took place at a small cafe near Eleanor's coastal town. When Cynthia arrived, Eleanor was struck by the faint resemblance to Charles. The curve of her jaw, the piercing eyes, even the way she carried herself. Cynthia was nervous, but polite. Over tea, they spoke cautiously at first, but as the conversation unfolded, Eleanor shared her perspective on Charles, the good, the bad, and the complicated. She answered what questions she could, careful not to color Cynthia's perception too much. By the end of the afternoon, Eleanor felt a strange kinship with the young woman. In Cynthia, she saw echoes of herself, a woman searching for clarity and peace after being uprooted by someone else's choices. "Thank you," Cynthia said as they prepared to part ways, "for your honesty. I didn't know what to expect, but I'm glad we spoke." "So am I," Eleanor replied with a soft smile. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Weeks later, Eleanor received another letter, this time from Cynthia. It was heartfelt, expressing gratitude for their meeting and sharing how it had given her a sense of closure. Cynthia mentioned plans to travel, to see the world and explore her identity on her own terms. Eleanor felt a quiet pride. The young woman had taken a step toward building a life untethered from the shadows of her father's choices, just as Eleanor had done. As winter set in, Eleanor stood on the beach, watching the waves crash against the shore. Her life had been shaped by tides of loss and renewal, pain and resilience. She had loved, she had been betrayed, she had found herself, and she had found peace. Her story wasn't perfect, nor was it easy, but it was hers, and it was real. As the sea breeze swept around her, Eleanor smiled. Her journey wasn't over, and that was the most beautiful thing of all. The following spring, Eleanor's life took yet another unexpected turn. One morning, as she arranged fresh flowers in a vase near the window of her cottage, a letter arrived. It bore no return address, but the handwriting was elegant and deliberate. She opened it cautiously, expecting another ripple from her past. Instead, what she found was something entirely different, a request. The letter came from a lawyer representing a man named Henry Whitmore, a childhood friend of Charles. The name stirred a faint memory. Henry had been a quiet, scholarly man who occasionally appeared at social functions during their early years of marriage. The lawyer explained that Henry had recently passed away and, in an unexpected twist, had left Eleanor a portion of his estate. The inheritance was modest, but puzzling. Why would Henry, someone she hadn't seen in decades, think of her in his final moments? The letter invited her to meet with the executor in the city to learn more. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Curiosity led Eleanor to accept the meeting. In the small office of a downtown law firm, she was greeted by the executor, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, who introduced herself as Miss Porter. "Mrs. Davenport," Miss Porter began, gesturing for Eleanor to sit. "Thank you for coming. I imagine this situation must seem unusual." "You could say that," Eleanor replied, her voice calm but curious. Miss Porter handed her an envelope. "Henry Whitmore left this for you. He said it would explain everything." Eleanor unfolded the letter, her hands steady as she began to read. Asterisk. "Dear Eleanor, if you're reading this, it means I've gone, and with me, a secret I've carried for many years. It's time you knew the truth, though I hope it brings you peace and not more pain. When Charles and I were young, I envied him. He had everything: charm, success, and you. I admired you from afar, always wishing I had the courage to tell you how remarkable I thought you were. But I knew my feelings were irrelevant. You were his, and I respected that. Years later, I learned of Charles's betrayals. I wanted to say something to tell you that you deserved better, but I lacked the courage. Instead, I chose to distance myself, a decision I've regretted ever since. I leave this to you now because I want to honor the woman who inspired me to be better, even if I never acted on it. This inheritance is a small gesture, a way to say thank you for being the light you were, even when you didn't know it. I hope it helps you continue living the vibrant life you deserve. With deepest respect, Henry Whitmore. Eleanor folded the letter slowly, her emotions a complex tangle of surprise, gratitude, and a bittersweet sadness. Henry's words were unexpected, but they didn't feel intrusive. Instead, they felt like the echo of a kindness she hadn't known she needed. "What does the inheritance entail?" she asked Miss Porter. "It's a property," Miss Porter said. "A small villa in Provence, France. Mr. Whitmore visited often and always spoke of its tranquility. He thought you would appreciate it." Eleanor blinked, stunned. A villa in France. The idea felt almost surreal, yet something about it stirred an unexpected excitement within her. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. By summer, Eleanor found herself stepping off a plane in the south of France, a sense of adventure bubbling beneath her calm demeanor. The villa was tucked away in a quiet countryside village, its stone walls covered in blooming wisteria. It was modest yet beautiful, with views of lavender fields stretching out to the horizon. As she wandered the property, Eleanor felt something she hadn't felt in years, a giddy sense of possibility. She imagined painting the landscapes, hosting quiet dinners with friends, and perhaps even teaching art classes to locals. For weeks, Eleanor settled into the villa, allowing the rhythm of rural life to envelop her. The warmth of the villagers, the simplicity of the days, and the endless inspiration from the surrounding beauty gave her a sense of freedom she hadn't known was possible. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. One evening, while sketching on the terrace, a knock at the door startled her. When she opened it, she found a man in his 60s standing there, his posture tentative but warm. "Mrs. Davenport?" he asked, his English tinged with a French accent. "Yes," she replied cautiously. "I'm Julien," he said, holding out a bottle of wine. "I was Henry's caretaker for many years. He spoke of you often and asked me to check on the villa, should you ever decide to come." Eleanor invited him in, and over wine, they exchanged stories about Henry. Julian's tales painted a picture of a man who was quiet but deeply kind, someone who had found peace in the simplicity of his later years. By the end of the evening, Eleanor felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for Henry's gift, but for the strange winding path that had led her here. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Eleanor's life in Provence became a new chapter, one filled with creativity, connection, and discovery. She opened her home to fellow artists, collaborated with local villagers, and found herself flourishing in ways she had never imagined. Looking out over the lavender fields one evening, Eleanor realized something. Her life had been shaped by storms, but it was the calm after those storms that had allowed her to truly grow. And so, with the setting sun casting its golden light across the horizon, Eleanor lifted her glass of wine in silent thanks to Charles, to Henry, and to herself, for surviving, for enduring, and for finally learning how to truly live. Eleanor's life in Provence became a canvas of unexpected joy. Each day felt like a chapter in a new story, one written not by obligation or routine, but by choice and curiosity. She immersed herself in the rhythms of the village, painting landscapes during the mornings, strolling through bustling markets in the afternoons, and savoring quiet evenings on the terrace with a glass of local wine. Her work took on a new depth. The rolling lavender fields and golden sunsets of Provence found their way onto her canvases, capturing not just the beauty of the scenery, but the tranquility she had found within herself. The villagers grew to know her as Madame Davenport. the kind but independent woman who always seemed to have paint smudges on her hands. One day, as Eleanor prepared for an art exhibit showcasing her latest works, she received an unexpected visitor. Julian, the caretaker who had introduced her to Henry's villa, arrived at her door with an envelope in hand. "This came to the village post," he explained, handing it over. "I thought you'd want it right away." Eleanor thanked him and, once alone, opened the envelope. Inside was a letter from Lila, her youngest daughter. Asterisk. "Dear Mom, I hope this letter finds you well. Meredith, David, and I have been talking, and we've decided to visit you in Provence this summer. We'd love to see the villa, your art, and the life you've built. It feels like time to bridge the distance, not just geographically, but emotionally. We miss you, Mom, and I think we're ready to truly understand you in ways we never did before. With love." Lila * Eleanor felt her chest tighten as she read the words. It was an invitation to reconnect, to share the life she had fought so hard to create. She wasn't sure if she was ready for such vulnerability, but the thought of her children walking the same lavender fields she now called home stirred a deep longing in her heart. ****. The summer arrived quickly, and with it, Eleanor's children. The villa buzzed with energy as Meredith, David, and Lila explored the property, their voices echoing with excitement as they discovered its charms. Eleanor watched them with a mix of pride and trepidation, wondering how they would perceive the life she had built. Over dinners in the garden, surrounded by flickering candles and the soft hum of cicadas, the family began to talk in ways they never had before. Eleanor shared stories of her journey, how she had found herself again after leaving Charles, how she had stumbled upon the villa, and how her art had helped her heal. Meredith, the eldest, was the first to break the silence that followed Eleanor's confession. "I never realized how much you gave up for us," she said quietly, her voice tinged with both regret and admiration. David nodded, his normally stoic demeanor softening. "We always saw Dad as larger than life, but you were the one who kept everything together." Lila reached across the table, taking Eleanor's hand. "And now look at you, Mom. You've created something beautiful, not just the villa, but yourself." Eleanor felt a swell of emotion she hadn't anticipated. For so long she had believed her children saw her as a relic of their father's shadow. Now she realized they saw her for who she truly was, a survivor, an artist, a woman who had reclaimed her life. ****. As the weeks passed, the family fell into an easy rhythm. They visited local vineyards, hiked through the countryside, and spent long afternoons in the villa's garden, sharing stories and laughter. Eleanor felt a weight lift from her shoulders, the burden of years spent apart, melting away. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Meredith approached Eleanor on the terrace. "Mom," she began hesitantly, "do you ever regret it? Leaving Dad? Starting over?" Eleanor turned to face her daughter, the golden light casting a soft glow over her features. "No," she said firmly. "It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Sometimes, letting go is the only way to truly find yourself." Meredith nodded, her eyes glistening. "I think I understand that now." ****. When the summer came to an end, Eleanor stood at the edge of the gravel drive, waving as her children piled into a rented car. As the dust settled and the villa grew quiet again, she felt an unexpected lightness. Their visit had healed wounds she hadn't even realized were still open. Eleanor returned to her studio that afternoon, her heart full. The canvas before her was blank, waiting for her next creation. As she picked up her brush, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. The pain, the loss, the resilience, and finally, the joy. With a steady hand, she began to paint, each stroke a testament to the life she had reclaimed. The image that emerged wasn't of the lavender fields or the golden sunsets she loved so much. It was a portrait of her family, gathered around the table in the villa's garden, their faces lit with laughter and love. Eleanor stepped back, studying her work. For the first time in years, she felt like her story was no longer just hers. It belonged to the people she loved, the people who had finally come to understand her journey. And as the evening light filled the studio, Eleanor smiled. Life, she realized, was not a single masterpiece, but a series of canvases, each one layered with mistakes, triumphs, and the beauty of starting anew. Eleanor's life, once fractured and scattered like shards of broken glass, had become a mosaic, a masterpiece of resilience, growth, and quiet triumph. As the seasons turned, the villa in Provence became not just her sanctuary, but a place where connections flourished. Her art was no longer just a personal journey, but a bridge to others, inviting them into her world of colors and emotions. One crisp autumn evening, Eleanor stood on the terrace, gazing at the rolling hills bathed in golden light. The scent of lavender lingered in the cool breeze. A table was set nearby with candles flickering in the twilight. Julian, now a dear friend, was helping arrange chairs for dinner, and her children were inside, laughing as they prepared a meal together. The villa had become a gathering place for family and friends, a symbol of everything Eleanor had rebuilt. It no longer carried the weight of Henry's admiration or Charles's legacy, but existed as a testament to Eleanor's spirit. As she watched the scene unfold, she thought back to the woman she had been on her golden anniversary, standing at that podium, exposing the truth. She had been trembling with anger and heartbreak, her voice steady only because of the years she had spent holding everything together. Now, she felt none of that weight. Life had not been fair, but it had been honest, and honesty, she had learned, was where freedom began. When dinner was served, Eleanor sat at the head of the table, surrounded by her children, her grandchildren, and a few close friends from the village. Glasses clinked, and the conversation flowed effortlessly, like the gentle ripple of a stream. Meredith raised her glass. "To Mom," she said, her voice full of pride. "To her courage, her strength, and her art, in all its forms." The toast brought a wave of laughter and cheers. Eleanor, never one for grand speeches, simply smiled, her eyes glistening. "Thank you," she said softly, "for being here, for sharing this with me. I never imagined this. But I'm so glad we've found our way back to each other." Her children nodded, their expressions filled with warmth and understanding. Later, as the evening wound down and the guests drifted off to bed, Eleanor remained on the terrace. The candles burned low, and the stars glittered overhead. She thought about Charles, about Henry, about the many people and moments that had shaped her journey. She didn't feel bitterness or regret, only gratitude for the lessons they had taught her. Eleanor picked up her sketchbook and began to draw. Her lines were steady, confident, and filled with life. She sketched the table, the empty chairs, the flickering candles, and the backdrop of the Provence night sky. It was a scene of simplicity, of togetherness, of a life she had rebuilt with her own hands. When she finished, Eleanor set the sketch aside and leaned back, letting the night envelop her. For the first time in years, she felt truly at peace. Her story had not ended at the anniversary, nor with Charles's passing, or even with her move to Provence. It had evolved like her art, into something layered and complex, shaped by pain, but defined by joy. Eleanor closed her eyes, the sound of distant waves lulling her into a quiet contentment. Her life was not perfect, but it was hers, and that, she realized, was the greatest masterpiece of all.